Hello, Comanche29 here, another Topic of the Week video, and this week I'm going to be talking about loose plot threads in Avatar The Last Airbender. This week's topic was submitted by KR Rika on the Discord, and their topic is: did you ever think certain characters or plot points were underdeveloped and or not shown in Avatar The Last Airbender when they should have been? Example, search for Zuko's mom. If so, would you have done anything differently? Okay, so one thing I really wanted to talk about when I first got this is the very first thing that came to mind is every ongoing TV show, especially if it's episodic, at least for the most part, because even though Avatar The Last Airbender has an ongoing story, a lot of the individual stories are episodic. Any story that's going along and it hasn't been meticulously planned out in detail every single step of the way, you're going to have some things that are just sort of left hanging. Now, in good writing, the only stuff that would be left hanging are very small stuff, stuff that's not like major for the ongoing story. In Avatar The Last Airbender, obviously, while they had a very generally pretty solid plan of what they were going to do, they didn't have every single little detail planned out over the course of the series. There were some things that were changed, some things that were added, yada yada yada. It's stuff that always happens, especially when you have like 20 writers like the show did. You're going to have a lot of different people with all these sorts of different ideas, and getting anything coherent out of that is the job of the head writer. Aaron has did a pretty good job with that. Now, the main story of Avatar The Last Airbender was resolved, and everything that was important for the main overarching story was concluded and wrapped up, along with a few other things. Now, the main plot of Avatar The Last Airbender is Aang needs to defeat the Fire Lord and stop the Fire Nation from doing all sorts of evil stuff in the war and become the Avatar. And he did that. That's how the story ends. He defeats Ozai. Ozai's defeated. Zuko takes his place as the new Fire Lord. They end the war. They bring peace and balance back to the world. A few other things are, wrapped up. You see that, Maya comes back and Mai patches her relationship with Zuko. You see that Ty Lee has joined the Kyoshi Warriors. There are still stuff that's not totally wrapped up. There are, because if you go back, because I just, relatively recently went back and rewatched the show. And yeah, there are a few things from certain episodes that aren't continued on. But considering the fact that they are just in an individual episode, that a lot of those characters just don't appear again. Because, like the characters from Zuko alone. Like, what happened to that kid's brother? Did he die? Did he survive? Was he ever rescued? We don't know. But that was just a town that Zuko went in and then got kicked out of by the end of the episode. So that's not really, like, in terms of the hierarchy of important plot points, it's kind of low on the list. Because you got up here, you're like, okay, we got to stop the Fire Lord, got to have Aang become the Avatar, and you got other stuff directly related to the characters. You have a lot of stuff resolved, but there are a lot of things that aren't. I mean, we don't really know exactly what happened with Toph and her parents at the end of the series. Did they fully reconcile? Well, they don't actually show that. What happened to Azula? Last we see, she's chained up screaming and crying, and then Zuko becomes Fire Lord. They don't specifically show what happened to her. There are a lot of stuff that isn't specifically explained, and that's not bad. Like, for an ongoing story like this, that's not a bad thing. Now, if it's a more smaller story, like if it's a singular movie or whatever, then yeah, if you leave a bunch of stuff, not resolved, then that's usually going to make it a little bit unsatisfying. But for an ongoing TV show with 60 plus episodes, a few things here and there, that's not a big deal. I mean, what happened to the Ty Lee? Well, the last we see, they're being sent away at the end of Book 3, and never see them again. We can presume they went back to the Earth Kingdom, but we don't really need to know every single detail, because this is also a matter of time. You have, in your final episode, you've resolved everything and you need to finish it out. You need to give it an ending. Unless we're going for a Lord of the Rings style, 20 straight minutes of just continual, concluding all the little plot lines, yeah, can you imagine if they cut out a full episode's worth of story from the finale, which took 4 episodes to do? The finale was 4 episodes. You imagine if they took an episode out and then, you know, cut down on the main plot and then tried to say, alright, here's what was going on with all the little stuff. That'd be nice, and if we got some extra stuff, that would have been nice. But if it comes down to resolving everything satisfyingly with the main plot, or focusing on a bunch of little stuff, you take the main plot. The little stuff, that's stuff that can be expanded on in other media. The biggest one out of them, as mentioned in the topic, is what happened to Zuko's mom. That is pretty notable in terms of background events, because it's something that comes up a lot in regards to Zuko and Azula's backstory. What happened to Ursa? What was going on with her? The death of Azulon, and then Ozai taking the throne. What exactly was going on with all of that? Where did she go? She was banished, and she left. What happened? That's stuff that doesn't need to be in the show, and while I've seen people suggest this, is just doing another season of, you know, covering all this other stuff. That's a bit of a problem when it comes to these types of stories. And I'm pretty sure I've mentioned this before in terms of talking about overarching writing. If you have a story, right, like let's just take Avatar, because that's the topic of this discussion. You have books 1, 2, and 3, and you have the story, and you have all the main plot is resolved. All the big stuff is resolved, and the last bits we have is just picking up loose plot threads. Could you make a full season out of that be like actually feel satisfying? Well, sure, with good writing, yes, but you do run the risk of, you know, as you continue the story on, of just continuing it for the sake of it. Could we go back and just revisit every single thing that wasn't completely and totally explained, and then come back and give them at least 1 episode of time to just resolve that? A lot of times we don't really need a full episode for that. A lot of times stuff that could be shown in a very short story, and, well, you could, you know, resolve some stuff. Like the idea of an episode of Sokka going to finding his space sword after he lost it. You know, or an episode on Toph and her parents. Stuff like that would be good, but it wouldn't really fit. Like, you would literally just be completely disconnected episodes of just trying to go back over other stuff that happened in previous episodes. And even if you try to use the Finding Zuko's mom as the overarching story, which I do think that individual story could work for a full season's worth of, you know, storytelling, the problem is, well, you can't really tie that story into all the other ones, so you would either be constantly cutting away from the interesting story of finding Zuko's mom to, you know, hey, like, let's go back to this one village, or hey, let's just go see this one group again, or let's go see how that little baby that we saw give, you know, birthed, let's see how they're doing. And especially after the whole story has been ended and we're just dealing with the extra stuff, in terms of the main story, the main show, I find it a little difficult to justify continuing the show just to include that. Because the show is already pretty packed as it was. You can't take away, you know, time that was already used for this stuff. I talked about this a bit in my Azula redemption video, where, yes, you know, if you tried to give Azula a redemption within the show, you would have to cut out so much other stuff just to make time for that, because that would need more than what Zuko got for his redemption arc. And then you would have to be taking out so much time, and even if you gave it all this time, even if you gave it half of a season, you would still be rushing it. And at that point, you're already, you know, completely gimping every other plot line that's going on, and you would ruin the climax of Zuko and Azula's fight. You would have to either, like, push that back, you know, very much earlier, or completely cut it out, and it really messes with a lot of stuff. And that's something I would like to see more of, you know, Azula and a possible redemption. but I don't want to cut into the show as is. And if you're talking about not even going to a 4th, 5th, 6th, whatever seasons of covering back every single loose plot thread, but just within the frame of the show itself, that's the time limitations that you got. You only have a certain amount of time to tell this story, and extending it past that is kind of just keeping it going for the sake of it. A lot of those little stories are things that are great for expanded materials. I honestly think, and I've suggested this numerous times, having an Avatar: Last Airbender comic series would have been great. You can tell a lot of relatively disconnected stories that would either be, you know, a mix of new stories of stuff that's going on post-war, along with a lot of smaller stuff that's sort of picking up plot threads. You could have a couple comic issues about, you know, Zuko, you know, trying to go and help that guy whose brother he met in Zuko alone. Like, as long as this stuff is like supplementary material, this is extra stuff, the comics, books, whatever. Like, conceptually, I like the idea of having some of those comics like they did, conceptually, not in execution. Things like The Promise and The Search, the idea of having these stories, but being just sort of, you know, they're just there for the fans who really want it. Because, okay, everything, the main stuff's resolved. Here's the little stuff for, you know, fans. What would fans want to see post-series? Okay, and that's the stuff for fans, and because you keep it going, and you risk losing a lot of people after you've already concluded the main story. There are a lot of people who, after the Avengers Endgame, they just decided, I'm done watching MCU movies. Not because they hate the MCU, but, like, after 10 years and everything has been, you know, stopped, everything's been concluded, and it's like, okay, you know, there are things that you could keep going, but a lot of people who just, they're like, okay, they beat Thanos, who's been the main bad guy, hinted at since Avengers, you know, everything's like, all this crazy stuff has happened, and Endgame was like putting a pin in a lot of stuff. Like, it's done. We've reached literally a movie called Endgame. So a lot of people are like, I'm just done. And a lot of people would be like that once you conclude the main story. And there are a lot of times when a show reaches that point, and they keep going past the point where all the main storyline is resolved, and trying to do extra stuff either requires you to just scrounge up every little thing that hasn't been talked about, or to just invent new stuff out of nowhere. Person of Interest was a show that did this. It had a 3-part special called, well, Endgame. And they basically resolved every major plot line that was going on for the entire show. And you're like, okay, so we're done here, right? Like, we're done. And then they're like, okay, now we're going to pull even more plot lines out of completely nowhere. And I ducked out at that point. I'm like, I'm done. Like, regardless of whether the show continues, I was done. Like, the main story has been concluded. And, you know, trying to continue the story of Avatar: Last Airbender past what it was, it would feel a little anticlimactic to have in the main show the build-up all the way to fighting the Fire Lord, the battle, the Agni Kai between Zuko and Azula, and then, okay, now we're going to go and do all these other misadventures, and then we're going to go look for Zuko's mom. The scale and stakes of the show had been increasing all the way to the finale, and then to move all the way up to the big battle of the finale, and then just go right back down to a lot of more mundane stuff, and then the stuff with Zuko's mom, which can be interesting, but what are really the stakes, you know, for the main show? Like, this is fine for supplementary material. This is fine if you have a comic series. But as a writer, I just wouldn't do that with the show. If you ask me what I would have done differently, I mean, outside of a few tweaks and changes in the show here and there, like, I honestly would have built energy bending up a little bit more and had more references to the Lion Turtle, and that's probably the main thing I would have changed. You know, there's a few tweaks here and there that you could make to improve the story, but a lot of these little things that weren't resolved, like Zuko's mom, that one I think deserves its own story. It deserves its own series of comics or books or whatever to actually tell that story. You know, that's not something that you can do within the show. Especially not within the series that we had, the books 1 through 3. Because there's already so much stuff going on. Packing in that stuff, it wouldn't even make sense for the story. Especially in book 3 when they're in the Fire Nation. They can't exactly go out of the Fire Nation to go deal with a lot of that other stuff and then come back to the Fire Nation when they've got things like the Day of the Black Sun and then, you know, prepping for the final battle with Ozai. It's not feasible. And I think the best course of action would have been to simply have an Avatar: Last Airbender comic series and just tell those stories. You can have an ongoing series, not like the 3-issue stories where like The Promise, The Search, and every other one they're doing. Not little miniseries, like one continuous story, like from post-series, what happened after the end, you know, continuing on for the story and finding out other stuff, maybe bringing a few things back, picking up on a few loose plot threads. And then, you know, featuring them finding Zuko's mom as a major storyline. I'll talk about that a little bit more in the future, because I actually do have a topic that's going to be related to that. But I'll talk about that in details then. But I don't think that you really needed to have all of that stuff done within the show itself. You really didn't need that. And I don't think that it makes the show underdeveloped or the characters underdeveloped. Because the characters are developed and the plotlines are all developed quite well. There's a few things that we could get more, like I mentioned, Toph and her parents. We never really got a full, total, actual, like, on-screen resolution about what was going on with them. But we don't need that for the main show. I mean, the stuff with her parents was enough with the show, and Toph as a character got plenty of development herself. So, stuff with her parents would be cool to see in extra materials. To see okay, so for the fans, these are the extra stuff that, you know, a lot of fans would want to see. But no. You don't need to show every little single thing that happens in picking up every little single loose plot thread. Because if they did focus on trying to do that, then they would have crammed in a lot more in book 3. And it wouldn't have been good. And if they tried to push past book 3 and tried to keep going on, you really run the risk of seasonal rot. And a lot of stories, they don't need to go for very many seasons. A lot of them could have just gone for a few seasons. Avatar needed those 3 seasons. It told its story, and then it stopped. After that, that's when you need extra materials. Like I've said, comic series would have been very good in concept. Execution was unfortunately bad. But yeah. Overall, Avatar: The Last Airbender was really well handled. And any extra plot points and stuff with other characters that we only saw like in one episode, we don't need all of that in the show. So I think that about wraps up this topic. If you want to submit a topic to me, you can either comment below if you're on YouTube. If you're on Tumblr, send me an ask, put topic : then whatever topic you want me to talk about, or go to the topic submissions channel in the Discord and submit a topic there. Just make sure to follow the rules that I'll be posting down below. If you want to watch last week's topic video, you can check that out here. If you want to watch next week's topic video, you can check that out here when I get that done. So what are your thoughts on this? Were there any loose plot threads from Avatar: The Last Airbender that you would have liked to have seen more of? Please comment below. And thank you for watching.